Welcome back to Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality, more than just getting deep. I'm your host, Enzi, and this week, y'all, we're actually going to be chatting about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, particularly about their waiver. But first, a word from our sponsors. This podcast is supported by the Newman School at the Talmud Torah of St. Paul, where academic excellence and Jewish values meet, teaching analytical and critical thinking skills that are necessary to thrive in a complex world. Now enrolling grades K through 5. Learn more at ttsp.org/Newman. All right, y'all. Like I said, we are going to be talking a little bit about the public. But first, before we interview and get chatting with Laura, let's go to a word from our sponsors. This podcast is supported by the Afternoon School in Midrasha at the Talmud Torah of St. Paul, offering online supplementary Jewish education for students in grades 2 through 12. Great Jewish education from any location. Now enrolling for fall. Learn more at ttsp.org/as-m. All right, welcome back to Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality more than skin deep. I'm so excited to have Laura here with us today, and I'm going to have her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what's going on. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks, Enzi. I'm excited to be here with you. So my name is Laura Monn Ginsburg. I use she, her pronouns, coming to you from downtown Minneapolis this morning. And yeah, I'm an advocate who's been involved for a long time in issues of justice and equity, and excited to talk to you today and dig into some more intersectionality.
And I'm excited. I mean, one of the things that I realized as you were just speaking, that one of the consistent fundraisers that I've always consistently donated to was NARAL, because that was the only pro-choice advocate organization that I knew about. And so one of the exciting things that I'm personally excited about is hearing more, but also how can we support the work, particularly as Jewish folks in our community? How can we continue to support the work? You don't have to answer that right now, but if you want to, you can, and we could.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I too, instinctively you think about Planned Parenthood and NARAL, some of these other amazing advocacy organizations on the ground doing work, in an advocacy space, in a service space, whatever it may be. And those are amazing organizations to support with your money, with volunteering, whatever you can do. And, there are other ways to get into the fight. And a unique way is with, an organization that is tied to your religious and your cultural heritage and where you align. So for me, National Council of Jewish Women has been a great place for me to do that. It's really an organization rooted in the fundamentals of the principles of Judaism and living those out and putting these ideals into action. And reproductive justice, abortion access have always been at the top of our list, and even more so now. So it is an interesting way to think about it, exactly what you were saying of, well, how else could I align this and see this work happen?
One of the things that really I love about thinking about is how do we get involved in using our faith community, our cultural community, however we identify it as a means for entering in and getting involved in this conversation, but also becoming more aware. This is a podcast on intersectionality. And one of the things that I'm aware of is places like Planned Parenthood, places that are really good on reproductive rights, are places that trans folks have access to in different ways, as well as this is just a huge conversation. It's not just the conversation of potentially the leak with Roe versus Wade, the conversation about reproductive rights is to me, right, it's a very Jewish conversation. It's very important to me as we're looking at what does this look like, as well as I can't imagine if shellfish and pork was outlawed in the United States based upon, I keep thinking about that and be like, what would that actually mean? But really thinking about like, how does this, as Jews, as people of faith, as people of culture, however we identify really, what would you say some tangible ways to get involved? And as well as maybe starting off by talking about I'm going to say the event. So that way I don't mess it up.
So the event you're talking about this weekend. Okay. So National Council of Jewish Women, Inc. is obviously a national organization. And then there are sections throughout the United States. So we have an amazing section here in Minnesota. We used to have a Minneapolis and St. Paul section. And with our powers combined, we are now NCJW Minnesota, and a really powerful, longstanding, over 120-year-old organization that has been here doing direct service work, advocacy work, and has really prided itself on being on the front lines of coalition building, partner building, and really thinking about where do we step back and put others forward. That's something that we're thinking about a lot, and especially given exactly what you were just mentioning about the inherent intersectionality of abortion access and abortion rights and reproductive health. That is an area where, as in many other areas, folks of color have typically been marginalized, certainly in the quality of care and access to care, but also in their ability to just speak about what they need and how they see themselves in it. So, National Council of Jewish Women is definitely thinking a lot about that and thinking about our own inherent privilege in this discussion. We have Washington Institute coming up starting this weekend in Washington, D.C., which is where our organization is headquartered. This is a semi-annual meeting that we do. We come together, we learn together, and a big highlight of this conference is always going to Capitol Hill and organizing visits with our representatives. Obviously, this year's a little different, given where we're coming out of COVID, and it's still not super accessible to get into the Capitol campus and buildings. So we decided instead this year, we're going to have a full-on rally, and it is about abortion rights, and it's the Jewish Rally for Abortion Rights. It'll be Tuesday, the 17th of May in Washington, D.C. And this is something that was always part of our plan for this event. And obviously, given current events, the leaked memo out of the Supreme Court, it is quintupling in size, which is awesome. So we are seeing interest from other advocacy groups, specifically Jewish advocacy groups, synagogues, other folks that identify with how we identify with abortion, and the imperative that we keep it accessible to all folks who need reproductive services. So that's going to be happening on Tuesday, and we're pretty excited.
Are there ways, we will see when this is recorded. Either you'll be listening to this on Tuesday or before. But if this is before, are there ways that folks can share the information about the rally? Is there a Facebook event? Or is this something that, maybe hasn't been shared extremely widely? I don't know. That happens sometimes.
No, that is a great question. It is going to be, so this is a conference, the good thing about COVID, if there are few good things, is that we have all learned to be a little bit more flexible. So we are offering virtual access to the conference. And that is something that folks can sign up for. We have a pay what you can option because we want it to be accessible and open to get more folks in these conversations. We'll be having conversations on everything from reproductive justice to anti-Semitism and the ways that we're seeing that increase, unfortunately. So folks can, they can tune in for that. They can hear from the many fantastic speakers that we'll have there. We have a professional conference planner, so fingers crossed they're on top of all these things. But yes, the short answer is yes, you can be involved virtually in this conference, in sessions, in workshops, and in the rally on Tuesday. So we would love to have as many faces and folks there. wherever they can be, whether it's with 2 feet on the ground or sitting at home.
So locally, people all over the country, I don't know, maybe more, I don't think so though, but people all over the country may be listening to this podcast, and we're in Dakota land, also known as I'm in North Minneapolis, but also known as Minneapolis, and really thinking about beyond Tuesday. Are there ways, I don't know a lot about NCJW. I know a little bit because there was an amazing panel. Time is weird. Well, there was an amazing panel during the pandemic. Right? Yeah, during the pandemic, that was really talking about, like, it brought together non-Jewish Black Northsiders and non-Black Jewish folks, and then me, who just happens to be both, and talking about the history of the history of the North Side, and trying to really think about what does it mean to work together and move forward with that. And I bring that up in a way of actually thinking particularly of this question of reproductive rights, of a way of naming that NCJW is doing some amazing work locally, and wondering, are there ways for folks to get involved? Is there maybe a sign up, email sign up sheet for folks to get? Because I'm realizing that I'm not on there, right? And so, like, I'm aware that we get information because we talked about earlier that we think of the big names. And so the local stuff, even though NCJW is national, getting involved locally, I think, is important. And actually, even if you're not in Minneapolis, there's y'all are all over. And so there's NCJWs all over, and really looking at what are some ways to get involved.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'll start locally and then get broader. So locally, here in Minnesota, NCJW Minnesota is extremely active. And we're doing a couple of things in this area. So, if abortion rights and access is where you have the most interest, we have a whole, committee that is focused on that. That includes organizing advocacy, such as days at the Capitol. We did a virtual day at the Capitol this year for obvious reasons, but usually we're there in person. We also sit at a few tables, including working with Unrestrict Minnesota, which is focused on, a lot of people want to take solace in the fact that Minnesota will remain a state that has state level protections for abortion should it fall federally. However, A, that can change, and B, we don't have perfect laws. There are always these conditions, or a doctor has to say this to you, or there's waiting period. There's these little things that really chip away at the abortion access that I think we all see as perhaps a binary. Either you can get an abortion or you can't. And it's really a lot more than that.
Can I add some stuff to that as well as you're bringing that up? Because I think one of the other pieces is we make assumptions about our representatives, our state senators' mindset. And we actually have, Minnesota is not the liberal state. It's the large cities. And so being very mindful that we're not 100% safe. We're not even, I wouldn't even say we're 50% safe, because there's been this push. And as specifically, I would love for us to start paying more attention to local stuff. Because as we're talking about this push, we're not as safe as we think we are. And I name that because I've had lots of conversations with folks who are like, oh, the South, this is experience, this is all this stuff. And I'm like, yo, we're not, we have work to do.
Yeah, you really can't take it for granted. Minnesota has the only split legislature in the country currently. So our House is Democrat controlled, our Senate is Republican controlled, and we have a governor, and most of our executive, if not all, branch is Democrat for now. We have a major election happening this year, this November, and everybody's up for re-election. Every single seat in the legislature is up, and all of our executive branch. So yes, we are a deeply purple state. Again, getting back to thinking about binaries, when you see an electoral college map and it's one color or the other, that does not mean that everybody feels the same way. Far from it. That's just that was just where the end tally fell on one side or the other. And we can get into the whole difficulty of having a two-party system that, you know, mostly runs things. But you are so correct. You know, this is something that we have to always be vigilant on. Every year at the Minnesota legislature, there is usually a bill introduced that looks to curb or end abortion access. And, you know, so far, or at least in recent years, we have had, you know, either a governor who has vetoed such legislation or something else that has happened. But to your point, we can't rest on our laurels. We can't act like it's a guarantee no matter what. And we can't take for granted that the laws we have are super great and really do provide accessibility and really do, you know, consider the intersectionality of all the people who need reproductive care. Which is not just folks identifying as women, which is not just, you know, one type of person that we usually see at the front lines of advocacy. So I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something that if you care about this is an issue you unfortunately always need to have your eye on.
Yeah, that is. I'm gonna let you finish talking about ways to get involved, because that is
yes.
the reality.
I was gonna say, I forgot. Okay, so nationally. So regardless of whether you are one of our listeners here in the great state of Minnesota or you're elsewhere, the National Council of Jewish Women is really on the front lines of this work. And something I'm excited about is that just in the past 6 months, we launched a campaign called 73 Forward. So knowing that abortion rights have been under attack, and that we were seeing courts getting chipped away at, we were seeing laws, and we were seeing these, you know, like the laws in Texas getting floated and then ultimately being upheld. You know, it's understanding that we were at a really critical and scary time. NCJW launched 73 Forward. And this is something that folks can get involved in wherever they are. What I love about this campaign is that it's really thinking about everything from grassroots to grass tops. So at the grassroots level, we will be working with a national abortion hotline and service organization that is specifically addressing the needs of those most marginalized and who have the most difficulty accessing the resources needed to do everything around, you know, an abortion is not just a medical procedure. You know, it can be travel, it can be time away from work, it can be childcare, it can be a lot of things. It can be mental health needs before and after. I mean, there's so much more to it. And we're going to be, you know, partnering there to have this national scale of response and ensuring that resources are going to the communities to be utilized and spent and directed by communities where and as they're needed. And then at the grass tops level, really thinking about where are we testing the full constraints of the law? You know, where are we filing amicus briefs? Where are we getting involved at state level politics and national level politics to ensure that we have representatives saying the word abortion, advocating for abortion, and acknowledging that the vast majority of Americans want abortion access upheld. So that is one other way that you can get involved. Obviously, that's mostly it's less boots on the ground. However, it is a way to be involved with your dollars, that you can see a link to funds and resources going exactly where they are needed most, exactly when they are needed most.
And having options to get involved in a less foots on the ground way is actually good, because then it means that folks have less of an opportunity to say, I'm overwhelmed, I do not know what to do. So these are just really small and important ways to get involved in. And really, I don't want to forget to say this, because this is really important. And this is just me speaking for myself, but I want to be really clear with folks that I don't care why a person choose to have an abortion or have to have an abortion or need to have an abortion. It is not my place to care why. I'm going to support y'all no matter what, 100% no matter what. And I'm just, I will name that oftentimes folks have to tell their story to be validated. And I want to name that, as well as, yes, I'm out as trans, but I do want to say that I've had lots of conversations with cis-identified males who are upset about their girlfriend who maybe had an abortion with their maybe child. And I'm not dismissing those conversations, but what I am saying is your experience of that does not oversee the experience of people who have the ability to get pregnant. It doesn't, it just doesn't. And that might be hard to hear, but particularly as a person who has been living and been seen as male for a while, I hear those conversations and I have those conversations, and I would say it's very disheartening. And we really hope that I'm speaking to folks who identify as male and masculine now, but really hope that we really figure out ways to become supportive, ways to actually be mindful, but ways to interrogate our own selves. It's okay to know that you made a mistake when you were younger and that you changed. I voted to ban gay marriage in Missouri in 2004. And I'm married to I'm a gay man. So like, it's one of the things where we change and we grow, but really wanting to think about how do we really wanting to name that we could support abortion, we can support rights, and we can also have sadness over whatever may or didn't happen without that impacting the other people's experience. For example, I'm gonna use sex as an example, but if I tell someone they've been acting racist towards me, I'm not gonna sit there and, oh, I'm sorry that you felt bad that I called you a racist. That doesn't really move us. It's really more of a crap. How do I do better? How do I change? Or if someone says, yo, Enzi, you just did something extremely sexist, I'm going to say, let me evaluate that. Let me see what's that's rooted in, because it's important for us to continue to look at those pieces. So I just wanted to make sure I said that because it doesn't matter. Yeah, I just, that's one of the things that's been popping on my brain a lot, especially this. There's nothing wrong with posting those, I'm pro Becky, blah, 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 blah. And whenever I see them, my body just completely freezes up, because I want everyone to be valid. And this is speaking as a person who I've had friends die giving childbirth. And that's not necessarily why I'm like, everyone should be able to make a decision. And I also am very clear that our bodies are impacted by the way we know how it feels. I have chronic pain. So I know in my body that if I was to get pregnant, for example, there's no way physically that I think I would have been able to carry a child. And if I got pregnant and I chose to have an abortion, it shouldn't be because, like, I shouldn't have to say, oh, I physically can't do that. Yeah, so I don't want to.
No, I totally agree with you. I've seen those going around too. I think about Becky, I think about, and I couldn't agree with you more. That was my same kind of knee-jerk reaction was, yes, I agree that on the one hand, I do think it's important to lift up all the kind of gray area that we don't think about. Right? You know, abortion for a long time, I think, has been, again, cataloged in kind of a binary of, oh, you don't want to. And there are folks that have medical reasons, have genetic reasons, have those health related or something in that category reasons. And I do worry about them and their safety. Should they have a pregnancy that needs to be aborted for a medical reason and they can't, it is worth thinking about those folks, because I don't think that we always have, kind of that full discussion about there are so many reasons that it could happen. And exactly what you're saying, none of my damn business. So whatever it is, certainly I worry about people where their own lives might be in danger. Because I think that it gets really reductive when we talk about abortion, not abortion. And if we truly take it off the table, we are looking at, people in peril. And peril exists in a lot of ways. The ability to finish school or to get a certain job or to live where you want to live or, whatever, all that right to access is also deeply important. The mental health toll, the physical health toll, the cost, et cetera. And so I totally agree with you that at the end of the day, an abortion is healthcare and end of sentence. You don't have to justify it to me. You don't have to validate it to me. And you shouldn't have to anybody else, because any other medical advice, procedures, what have you, that I seek is also something that I don't have to justify or validate to anybody else.
And naming how this is, as you say, that this is why this is an intersectional issue and understanding it, right? Because I don't have the right to get a hysterectomy the same way that Laura probably would. I have to get psychological proof that and I have to get psychological proof that I'm psychologically fit and ready to have a hysterectomy. I have to prove, regardless of if it's a physical thing or not, I have to prove that I have been transitioning for such a long time period. I have to get, and it's not just one psychological letter, I have to get 2 letters. And I'm just mindful that my therapist this year was like, wait a minute, why do I have to do all of this stuff? And I'm like, that's just, and naming that there's laws that we forget to take away and look at and say, oh, right, the rest of the folks aren't doing this. But something you said that one of the things that you said, Laura, that I was really thinking about, and you didn't say this, but maybe think about, there are abortion doulas. I don't know, I heard it coming up a few years ago, and I haven't heard a lot of it recently, but really thinking about what does it mean to supporting folks who are, who may be going through an abortion. And then just one last thing I don't want to forget, as we're uplifting different stories and uplifting, saying that these other stories do matter, reminding folks that sometimes I have an ample amount of friends who, if they did not have an abortion, they would be forever connected with their abuser. And that is just the point that, like, just leave it out there, because it's an important thing to really be mindful of. And so I could go on and on about this, and I hope we have another time to talk and interview and on
no,
different
I agree, because there's so many kind of unintentional, or maybe intentional, frankly. I don't want to give too much credit to some people. There are some intentionally racist ways and classist ways, getting back to the intersectionality of it all, where there are people who truly don't care or care to do the bad thing, because they want to keep systems of oppression in place that keep people where they think they should be. And abortion is a tool for doing that. And that's something that can't be ignored in all of this. So I'm really glad you brought that up, and I'm happy to deviate to all the places, because that's exactly what intersectionality gets us to, right? Is the whatabouts, and thinking through some of these permutations that don't always show up in these black and white conversations that we get reduced to having. And it's unfortunate, because there is every space body is different, and only the person living in it is living in it. And it's just ludicrous to me that we're in 2022 and still having these discussions, to your point about your own journey. Somebody has to validate outside of your body what's happening in your body, even though you could tell them what's happening in your body, and that should be good enough.
Yeah. And so, I'm excited to continue, having this conversation in many ways, because this is an ongoing conversation, not just about reproductive rights, but in general. And one of the things that I'm thinking about down the line, right, but a conversation about, within the last few years, there's been more and more conversation in the Jewish community about gender equity, and what that looks like and how that looks. So that's, as we're talking, like, yeah, that's a good topic to chat with you about. But really, folks, y'all, if this is coming out before Tuesday, I hope that you could get involved in some of the stuff that's happening. Really, I encourage you to look up NCJW. We will have the website connected to the local and the national website connected to the podcast. And I want to make sure, I don't know if I can say anything else. So, Laura, do you want to add anything or say anything else to our listeners?
Yeah, just to close, I think a lot of us know this, and I think a lot of us take pride in this, as those of us who identify as Jews. The Torah is clear on this issue. Abortion is not only permitted in Judaism, but in some cases required, especially when the pregnant person's life is at stake. And, I don't want to lose sight of that. I think sometimes religion gets invoked in the abortion discussion and definitely adds another layer of intersectionality to all of this. I'm really proud that my religion and my culture have this viewpoint, and I'm excited to continue working with other Jewish advocates as well as non-Jewish advocates, of course, to not only think about this and care for this issue, but to advance it everywhere that discussions need to take place.
I'm wondering, and this is going to be more of a wondering closing statement, but really wondering, recently I've been really having more and more conversations about what would it look like if we put spirituality at the core of the work that we do in movement spaces. I am not in the closet about being agnostic. And so I would say that, and still spirituality for me, particularly as a Jew, is so very important. And so even when I do the work I'm lucky, I work for a Jewish organization as an organizer, and my brain is always like, okay, this holiday is coming up, or this is what's in the Torah portion. How do we make use of it? I also just finished a 5-part series on the Torah of abolition. And I'm naming that today. And I'm wondering if, and it's got to be there, but tech studies and Torah studies own this abortion conversation. And if it's not there, I would love to see if that's happening somewhere. So that's what I wanted to end with. And Laura, I would love for you to get the last word if you wanted to.
My last word would just be, I agree with you. This is a spirituality conversation. This is the deep morals that are inside of you. I too consider myself somewhere in the spectrum of beliefs. And I think that's one of my, if not my favorite thing about Judaism, right? It not only invites you to question, it really requires you to question yourself, those around you, structures that you live in. And I just think that more than ever, this is a time that we need that strong Jewish moral, that strength of that, whatever that is for you, to speak out on reproductive health, rights, and justice. And I'm proud to do that. I'm proud to know folks like you who are doing that. And I hope that others will be inspired to join the fight wherever and however it makes sense for them.
Thank you so much. All right, y'all. Thank you again for listening to Kumbah Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality, more than just skin deep. See y'all next time. Peace. Kumbah Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality, more than just skin deep, is a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. You can email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast.